Today's slate for MLB DFS is basically the opposite of yesterday's, because yesterday I felt really good about a bunch of different starting pitchers, felt like we could feel confident in a lot of them, and they did pan out pretty well. Today, the pitching is a little bit shakier, and the stacks are actually where I feel a lot of confidence. That doesn't happen all that often for MLB DFS because stacks inherently are higher variance, because hitting is less predictable than pitching, so it's weird to feel this way, but I do think it's a slate where there are two not surefire, but really good stacks available and some question marks of pitching. So we're going to dive in today, sort through those question marks of pitching, run through those two stacks that I adore, and get you set for Wednesday night's slate. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down Wednesday's 7-game main slate, with lock set for 7:05 for tonight. Weather here, there is some to note, especially out in Baltimore. A high chance of rain for the Orioles and the Mariners. Looks like it's going to rain all day. So I'm not crossing that game off my list because it's still 9 in the morning. But if you plan on using Mariners or Orioles, make sure you check the status of that game later on. I am pretty worried about that one. And, it's a decent spot for stacking, too. We'll talk about that in a bit. It's just 46 degrees in Chicago today as the White Sox host Cleveland. Big downgrade of hitters there. Easily the coldest game on the slate. Second coldest is actually in Los Angeles. 56 degrees there for the Dodgers and the Rockies. So downgrade hitters in Chicago and Los Angeles, and make sure you are checking back on the weather for the Orioles and the Mariners out in Baltimore. As always, back again later today, 4 p.m. Eastern, the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages getting you set for tonight's slate. We have a daily Q&A on all those platforms, taking your questions and answering questions about pitchers I did not discuss, why I like a pitcher I do like. We can go through the process of that. We can talk stacks. We can talk one-offs, value plays, whatever is on your mind. Tune in 4 p.m. Eastern every weekday right here on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages, and make sure you are subscribed on your platform of choice so you get notifications as we go live each and every day. And, of course, the solo shot here at 9 a.m. Every weekday on YouTube as well. On the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed right now, we've got PGA for the RBC Heritage. We have got NBA and NHL from Tom Vecchio. We've got, of course, MLB. Austin Swaim has UFC later this week. I have NASCAR coming up on Friday for Richmond. So a lot of good stuff here. Basically every-ish sport going on right now available on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. So make sure you are subscribed. Pick the podcast you want to listen to. Decide which ones fit what you're playing for that day. Subscribe, and if you like what you hear or if it does help you play some DFS well, make sure you leave us a rating and review as well. Baseball fans, FanDuel has a special contest for you running every day. The FanDuel Home Run Challenge is free to play. All you have to do is draft a team of 3 players. You'll receive 1 point for each home run that they hit. Compete for a chance to win a part of the $10,000 prize pool. Head over to FanDuel today and play the Home Run Challenge for free. To play, download the FanDuel Fantasy app or go to FanDuel.com. Eligibility restrictions apply. Pitching preview for this Wednesday slate. Zach Wheeler is the highest salaried pitcher on the slate. It's a revenge game for Zach Wheeler against the Mets. He is $9,700. Lance McCullers checks in at $95. Dustin May is $9,000. Then we have Charlie Morton, Zach Plesac, Carlos Rodon, and John Gray as the others at $8,000 or higher. And as you hear those names, it probably becomes obvious why pitching is okay for today. It's not bad. It's not like a slate of all just fifth starters, but there's no Bauer, Bieber, Giolito, et cetera, available here. So there's some digging to do. So I would take a less firm approach than what we've had the past 2 slates, where I felt really good having super high exposure to each pitcher. I think today is a good day to spread things out, cover your bases, and I think it's a day where I'm going to build around stacks, which is counter to what I usually do for DFS. But after sorting through everything for the pitchers, I'd put Lance McCullers at the top of the heap. He's facing Detroit, and they've been very good this year. And I expected that coming in. I didn't expect them to be very good. I expect them to be better than what they were last year. And they've got some guys who can play. But they're still a high strikeout team. They're at a 27% strikeout rate this year. They're at 27% since the start of last year versus righties. Just a 7% walk rate. All of that is tremendous for McCullers. He's also added a new slider to his repertoire this year, and it's a pitch he's using a lot, so that's important for sure. And it has added to his walk rate. That's a concern because it's been an issue for McCullers his entire career. He walks too many guys. That's an issue. It's just less of an issue against this team than others due to the low walk rate we talked about before. And the strikeouts should be there. In those 2 starts, McCullers has a 32% strikeout rate. Both those starts were against the A's. So they saw him twice, but still didn't really beat him up the second time around. Now, he stays at home, faces Detroit. They also rank 28th against sliders since the start of last year per FanGraphs pitch info tab. So this new pitch looks pretty fun. He gets a good matchup. He has thrown 95 and 88 pitches so far, so it seems like he is stretched out. That is enough for me to put Mccullers at the top of my list, even if he's not necessarily super far ahead of the pack. $9,500, not a restrictive salary, allows you to get the stacks you want. So I think Mccullers a good option for today, and not going to have like 100% exposure, but I think he deserves to be the highest exposure pitcher of the day. We talked about Dustin May going into his first start, and I want to talk about him again here as my number 2 pitcher. And there was a lot of buzz about May going into the season about this curveball that he had, and they thought it was going to help him get more strikeouts. He didn't throw the curve a ton in his first start this year. It was 11% usage, but the strikeouts were there. He had 8 across 6 innings. He allowed just 2 hits, so he was awesome there. It just wasn't because of that curveball. Instead, it seemed like the nasty pitch for Dustin May in that outing was his cutter, especially against lefties. His whiff rate on that pitch was 75%. He threw it just 18 times, but pretty good number. Small sample, but good numbers there. The bigger change for May is that he cut down the usage on his sinker. And if you are a regular solo shot listener, you know we hate sinkers. In this house, we hate sinkers. That's a good thing. And it was a pitch last year for May that rarely generated swings and misses. So cutting down that usage in itself is good. Whether it goes to the cutter, the curve, the four-seam fastball, it's just good to see the usage go down on that pitch. And May is already a guy who limits hard contact and limits walks. So if you give strikeouts to his profile, he has superstar upside if he can maintain those other things. So he might get strikeouts here, especially in this matchup, because the Rockies have a 26% strikeout rate versus righties, an 8% walk rate, an 82 WRC plus. They are a very much plus matchup for right-handed pitchers facing them, probably for lefties too, but especially for righties. And I think that it's a boost to guys like Dustin May, who have that baseline of being a good pitcher, but then can become even more if they add strikeouts. And I think he will do that for tonight. May has a good floor due to the peripheral stuff. He will gain a ceiling if the strikeouts come, and we have good reason to believe that they could. And that's enough for me to feel very good about Dustin May as my second-ranked overall pitcher for tonight. I think he's on par with McCullers. Like, if it were just those two, I would say, like, it's either 50-50 from exposure perspective or 55-45 in favor of McCullers. It's a very thin line between those two. I like both, and we'll use both heavily. The third pitcher does worry me a bit more than those two, and I don't know how long he'll go, but that's the one concern with him. That guy is Charlie Morton, and those length concerns for me are twofold. The first thing is that Morton does have a recent injury history and also an extensive injury history, so that's a concern. And second, the Rays are smart about things. They're a smart organization. They may think the best version of Charlie Morton is going 5 or 6 innings and then leaving the game. They could be right. Like, they're very good at what they do. So that's a possibility with Charlie Morton. 76 and 83 pitches in his first 2 starts, worth keeping in mind. But I think there's still enough here for us to use Morton until we get a firm read that, no, he's not going to go longer than that. I think for now, we're still good to use Morton in DFS. It does look like he's kind of back to his old self from an effectiveness perspective so far. He has a 3.27 skill interactive ERA across 2 starts with a 27% strikeout rate. And these changes aren't just 2 starts. He did actually start to look like himself towards the end of last year, too. He's been using that slider at a higher rate since his final 2 starts in 2020. And in that 4-start sample, a 29% strikeout rate, a 3.6% barrel rate allowed. And those numbers are very much in line with the Charlie Morton of 2018, 2019, et cetera, et cetera. And they're really good numbers and numbers that we want to seek out in DFS. I don't know if they'll stick because it's a 2-start sample. He is older. Maybe maybe just not quite there. But, and that's going to keep him out of the top 2. And it's going to keep him, a not distant third, but a steady third away from McCullers and Dustin May. But he does look really good right now. The Marlins, not a super threatening matchup. They have a 90 WRC plus against righties with a 24% strikeout rate. So I like a lot of things about Morton, and I do think that there is the potential for him to go more than 83 pitches here, because if you look back at his last start, when he left, it was after the 6th inning. Due up in the 7th inning were two left-handed batters out of the 3 batters who were due up. They brought in a lefty. So I'm not assuming he can't go longer. I just don't want to assume that he will. That's why Morton is 3rd on my list as opposed to sitting higher. I feel better about Mccullers and May overall, so they will be my top 2 guys. But all 3 of these guys deserve to be in your player pool if you're multi-entering. I would say from an exposure perspective across those 3, probably like 40% Mccullers, 40% May, 20% Morton, somewhere in that range. If that helps you gauge my sentiment on those 3 pitchers, that's where I'm at right now. So a gap between between McCullers, May, and Morton, all 3 M's, and then the rest would be there as well. Not really anyone outside of them looking to use too much. I think that Carlos Rodon is defensible, just a lower strikeout matchup for him against Cleveland. So that does lower him for me as he comes back from that stomach bug. Stacks for today. This is where the fun is for me. And we've got 2 that I adore. And we talked a lot about this year about trying to maximize balls in play for stacking, because balls in play allow us to get more chances at high upside plays. We get an extreme example of that tonight. And I think it pushes us to rank the Rays at the top of our list. Now, the Rays did come short last night. I know that. I was not super pleased with them, but I think that it's a much, much, much better spot tonight than what they had last night. They're facing Kohei Arihara, and it's just a 2-start sample for Arihara. But in those 2 starts, he has a 5% strikeout rate and a 3% walk rate, which means if you add that up, he is allowing balls in play 92% of the time. That is the most extreme example that I've seen in a long time. Usually we're sitting, we're in awe of Antonio Senzatela allowing balls in play 80% of the time. He's topping that by a massive margin. So that would usually mean that Arihara is doing a good job of limiting the damage in those balls in play. But right now, the barrel rate against him is 18%. That is a very high number. For some context, that's roughly where like Giancarlo Stanton was when he was healthy in 2020. I'm not saying that people have been Giancarlo Stanton against him, because his ERA is 5.00, so the results have been good for Arihara, but his expected ERA, according to Baseball Savant, is 9.90. That's a really rough situation. So it's fun to have new pitchers who can join the big leagues and potentially be viable options, but Arihara's first 2 starts are painting a tough picture for him as far as a DFS perspective. It's great to limit walks for real life, but it does lead to a lot of balls in play. Balls in play are what we want in DFS. So I'm thinking that it's a good situation to stack against him. I know the ERA at 5.00 does not raise any red flags, and the Rays are disappointing at times, but I think that tonight they need to be our number 1 stack of this slate. So I think their priority is the way that I phrase that. They're a stack I'm going to build around tonight. Given the pitching salaries here, I think it's a great time to load up on Austin Meadows. He is $3,700. That is far from outrageous, and he's looking really good. Looks like last year, complete fluke. He had COVID-19, didn't really recover during the year. So this year, he's recovered. He looks great. 316 isolated slugging percentage. His expected WOBA at Baseball Savant is 440. Arguably the top hitter on this entire slate. I think that Meadows is someone you build around, plug in guys like Brandon Lau. He's $2,900. I think that's a great number for Lau too, but Meadows, an elite option for tonight, and someone I want to make sure I have a lot of in this matchup. The second really fun stack is one I have not gotten to use yet so far this year, which is disappointing. That's the Braves. They're a really fun team. They just had a bunch of semi-tough matchups. They've not been on the main slate. They've had weather, et cetera, but we get a fun matchup today. They're on the main slate, so I'm going to put the Braves second on my list behind the Rays. They're facing Nick Nydert, and Nydert looked good in his first start. He held the Mets to 1 run over 4 to 3rd innings, but the underlying numbers for Nydert were not quite as glowing. Namely, he had 5 walks compared to 3 strikeouts. His swinging strike rate was just 8.2%, and that's in line with expectations because Nydert was never a high strikeout guy in the minors. So similar to Arihara, Nydert is someone who projects to allow a bunch of balls in play. Last week seemed to confirm that assumption, even though he did get the good results in that game. Nydert was also not a big ground ball guy in the minors. So if he does wind up being someone who doesn't get ground balls and lets up a bunch of balls in play, he could get in trouble pretty quickly. That's especially true against a lineup as lethal as this Braves team. So the Braves on most slates would be the number one stacking option. We just happen to have a really good option elsewhere, which pushes the Braves down to 2. But again, this is why I feel really good building around the pitchers for today and then allowing my differentiation, or building around the stacks today and allowing my differentiation to come with the pitchers for this slate. So the comfortably number 2 option is the Braves for me. One guy I am prioritizing here is Dansby Swanson. He strikes out more than you would like against Rays. It's a 28% clip, but a 38% hard hit rate, a 38% fly ball rate. So when he does make contact, it's generally good contact. He's striking out too much this year as well, and that's a concern for me in a small sample. Strikeouts stabilize more quickly, so seeing someone with a high strikeout rate does raise a red flag. The hope for me is that it's a result of all the tough matchups. Like, I haven't stacked the Braves yet all that much, at least on main slates, because they've been facing tougher teams. So that to me says it may not be as if Swanson is falling short of expectations, given that they've been in tougher spots. So this is a situation where he could rise in a less tough matchup and come through for us at $2,500. And I think that he's a great option if you need a value play to get you Ronald Acuna Jr., Freddie Freeman, other guys like that. I think that Swanson can help you get there. So definitely someone I want to get to for today. And of course, Marcell Ozuna was, I think, like $2,700 last night, and he is 28. So I'll be going there as well. He had a home run, so we'll be going to Ozuna and Swanson for values to get to Acuna and Freeman. The third stack is in Baltimore for the Orioles and the Mariners. Assuming that the rain lets it play, I'll go through another stack to discuss in things to watch in case it does not. But I think you could justify stacking either side of this game. But again, our mindset here is we want to maximize balls in play. And that leads us to stacking the Mariners, who are facing Matt Harvey. And Harvey has gotten unlucky so far this year. His peripherals are actually better than his results, but part of it is because his peripherals love his low walk rate, and he had that low walk rate last year. So that's something we can probably expect to stick around for Matt Harvey, even as the sample expands. And that's a good thing. But I also think that his low strikeout rate is probably going to stick too. He has an 8.2% swinging strike rate. His strikeout rate is 21%, which means it's more likely to come down than go up. So when you combine the assumption that he will have a low walk rate with the assumption that his strikeout rate will come down, he's probably going to wind up allowing balls in play somewhere between 75 to 80% of the time. That's a big number, and it's one we should stack against. There's a 6% barrel rate against Harvey so far this year. It was 12% last year. So he hasn't looked too bad so far, so it's possible we're not stacking against him the next time he comes up. But for now, I think it is wise to keep on doing so, meaning we do it with the Mariners here for tonight. So I'm into Kyle Seager, Mitch Haniger, Jose Marmolejos, but I want to dig into Taylor Trammell really quickly. He's making good contact thus far, but he's also striking out 47% of the time. And we saw that a bit in the minors. His strikeout rates are higher than you would like at AA. So he's not making a lot of contact, and that might stick. But the plus side here is that he is hitting them well when he does make contact. Harvey, not a big strikeout guy, so he gets a bigger boost facing a low strikeout pitcher than other guys may. The strikeout concerns are acknowledged with Trammell, but I am into him here. So the strikeout concerns for Swanson and Trammell are legitimate, and they do give me some pause before pumping them up here on the podcast. But I think that Trammell still makes a lot of sense. But overall, I mean, the Mariners just some pretty good options, not even to mention Ty France, who had another home run last night. Seager's $3,500. Trammell, $2,800. Marmolejos, if he plays, like that's not a lock by any means, but he's $2,600. So I think you've got good options within this Mariners team you can turn to when stacking them. But again, make sure you check the weather beforehand. And speaking of which, let's go to things to watch here. And I do think that if we get clearance on the weather there, you could justify stacking the other side of that game. It's not quite as into it because that's the Orioles against Justin Dunn. And Dunn walks too many guys for me to get super jazzed about stacking against him. And this is a change in my process where I used to be very okay with that. And I'm kind of okay with it now, just less so. Because if you look at the number of runs the opposing team scores when Justin Dunn starts, it's not all that high. So maybe it's a strategy of his to walk a lot of guys to keep the number of balls in play against him low. It's working, It can get off the rails, which is why I think you can justify going here with the Orioles, but I would rank the Orioles behind the three teams discussed initially, especially behind the Braves and the Rays for tonight, but behind the Mariners as well. If you do wind up needing more bats as a result of rain in Baltimore, I'd say the Astros and the Phillies are worth considering. The Astros are facing Michael Fulmer. His stuff has looked a lot better in the bullpen to open this year, but that's in the bullpen, and he's starting now. There is enough there where I am lowering the Astros because Fulmer might be, not back to what he was, but better than what he was last year. So I would put the Astros third on my list if we do lose the Baltimore game, but they're definitely below the Rays and the Braves as a result of Fulmer showing a bit more life this year than he did last year. The Phillies are facing David Peterson. We talked about this a couple of days ago before that game got rained out. He didn't light it up last year, and he looked rough in his first start this year. So Peterson facing the Phillies means Alec Boehm gets the platoon advantage. Andrew McCutchen still hits lefties well. So they're a good option too. So if we do lose the Baltimore game, I would say Astros are third, Phillies are fourth, but the clear runaway favorite stack for today will be the Braves and the Rays. Finally, John Gray is facing the Dodgers today. And I'm conflicted about what to do there because he's looked really good in his first two starts. He has a 4.13 skill interactive ERA. His swing and strike rate is 10.9%, and he has not let up hard contact. Plus, he's been leaning more on his off-speed stuff, which seems like it is a good thing for him. So that's why I'm not stacking the Dodgers. There's enough there where I feel okay going away from Los Angeles, and it's also colder there today. That helps too. But it's hard to write them off completely given the track record that John Gray has, given that it's the Dodgers. I am right now leaning towards just staying away from the situation entirely, not stacking the Dodgers and not using Gray as a pitcher, but I do want to see what he can do. If he can shut down the Dodgers again, that's going to be a big increase for John Gray. So I want to keep an eye on him, see what he does. But as for right now, I think it's a game I do want to avoid from a DFS perspective for tonight. That is all that we have for today. Again, it's a day where I will be building heavily around those two stacks, which is very weird. Again, I try to build around pitchers for the most part, but I think for today, given the gap between those two stacks and the rest, and given the ambiguity of pitcher, I think that is the correct way to play things for today, and we'll see how things go. We'll talk more about that later today at 4 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. Feel free to tune in there. Fire away with your questions about whatever may be on your mind with regards to MLB DFS, and we'll get you set for tonight's slate. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions for me before 4 p.m., I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for setting up this broadcast for today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your DFS lineups. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.